Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Sage Tabletop Talks. I'm Sage, and I'm going to talk to you about tabletop games. And while not as positive as Danger Patrol, it's also not going to be nearly as negative as Know Your Role. But I'm going to talk about, or kind of semi-review, D20 Modern. My D20 Modern book. It used, and my books tend to be a little haggard just because, generally speaking, when my group played, I bought the books, and so you had like, at the time we were playing D20 Modern, we had like DM and 9 players, so 10 people sharing one book, so it got used a lot. Um, but anyway, I digress. So D20 Modern is fascinating, and we actually played D20 Modern quite a bit. We liked it at the time. Um, I think that it's a little dated now. I think that when was this game's release date? It was like 2003, something like that, 2004. It's got a copyright in here. 2000 and... Oh man, I can't find the copyright date. 2002. So about 2 years after 3rd edition was released. And of course, Third Edition was released. It was released with the OGL. I have a shit ton of OGL games. I have Swashbuckling Adventures. I have D20 Modern, Know Your Role, Rokugan / L5R. I think it's the one's Oriental Adventures. So yeah, there's quite a bit of this OGL stuff because between the years about 2000 and 2006, 2007, you couldn't buy a D&D book unless a tabletop role-playing game book unless it had that little OGL license on it. There's a little D20 system tag on it. But D20 Modern is kind of fascinating me because it really shows where Dungeons and Dragons, had this book been a little more successful, I've seen other books use this kind of system for character creation too, but had it been more successful, I wonder what 5th edition, 4th edition would have looked. Probably 5th edition, probably not 4th edition. 4th edition, I almost feels like 4th edition was in the works while 3rd edition was still being released. Like, it felt like 3rd edition was just a placeholder for a while, because 4th edition is so radical, it borrows nothing from the OGL, the Open Gaming License. Instead of the OGL, there's other OGLs out there, but this Open Gaming License for tabletop gaming. So, but the idea is you take a kind of D&D, and you can just set it. And this D20 Modern is very generic, modern setting. It's just very guns. It has in the back a little bit of stuff for Urban Arcana. I don't have the Urban Arcana book, sadly. I wish I did. But yeah, like Urban Arcana, it's got like stuff in there for like, there's a Displacer Beast. No, it's Rust Monster. Nope, Displacer Beast. It is Displacer Beast. And it's got stuff in here for being like the mage. Things like that. But generally speaking, how the game, you start, because traditionally in Dungeons and Dragons, you have your fighter, your wizard, cleric, druid, rogue, all this stuff. And this game doesn't really have that. It does with the prestige classes, but the core classes don't really have that. Instead, there are 6 core classes. There's the strong hero, the fast hero, the smart hero, the tough hero, the dedicated hero, and the, I believe, charismatic hero. I think they didn't get very creative with that one. Strength and charisma didn't get very creative with their names. But, so these classes generally are built around a single stat. The strong hero is built, charismatic. The strong hero is built around strength stat. The fast hero is built around your dexterity stat. The charismatic hero is built around charisma. And what that means is every class is effectively a 1-stat character. But if you check this out, it only goes to level 10. And not the traditional level 20 you would get from D&D. And that's because this game doesn't just heavily encourage, it requires multi-classing. Now, I think that you could, really, if you wanted to, take it past level 10. Because the way the talents in this game work, and I'll get into that here in a minute, because these talents are really a fascinating element of the game. And it could be so interesting to see Dungeons and Dragons do something in this kind of similar fashion with the things. But you take, like, okay, the game wants you to take, like, 6 levels in Strong Hero, 3 levels in Fast Hero, and then move into a prestige class, like Martial Artist or Soldier or Infiltrator, whatever it is you want to be. But so in traditional Dungeons and Dragons, you would get, and even 5th edition, you would take a level in a class. You would take a level in Paladin. Okay, well, what do you get? You get an additional smite per day. And there's no real variance in that. You hit level 6 and you get an additional smite or whatever. And even in Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, when you pick your oath or your character's archetype, I don't know which subclass, whatever you want to call them. I call them archetypes. You don't still really have choice in that matter, If you take the Oath of Vengeance Paladin at level 3, 6, 9, whatever, you get your path power, your subclass power. You don't get a pick. Okay, at level 3, I want to take the Oath of Vengeance's Smite, and at level 6, I want to take the Oath of Redemption's Lay Hands On. Whatever, that's not how it works. You really effectively, at level 3, lock it in, but effectively even before that, you just kind of pick realistically, you look at level 1 and you pick which archetype you're going to be, and you build your character. It goes from 1 to 20, and there's no real variance if you go, there's multi-classing, and even that in Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, it's almost like a requirement to level dip. But it's not really baked into the game. It's just kind of the way it all falls out. But in D20 Modern, you basically have to dip in and out of levels. But how it works is, so you start at the first level, and you get a class talent. It just says you get a talent. At every even level, you get a bonus feat. Feats were a huge thing in 3rd edition. Like, much of character customization was built around your feat selection. Even though realistically, you pretty well laid out, like, you would have feat chains like, no, if you were doing whirlwind attack, you had to get weapon focus, weapon expertise, I can't remember what it's called, moving attack, like spring by attack or whatever, dodge, etc., etc. You just had to kind of tick, 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 tick down this list of feats. You got one level 1. If you were human, you got 2 at level 1. 2, level 1, 3, 6, 9, 12, whatever. Get this kind of has the same. It's got less of these kind of feat trees. But you get these bonus feats, which was a huge part of your character customization when you did creation. Which 5th edition is basically all removed. Feats are pretty well, more or less, useless with a handful of exceptions. They're really just more there to kind of flavor your character than anything. I mean, if you're just looking for straight optimism, maybe 1 or 2 feats, but you're probably just going to get your ability score boosts, which you get at levels 4, 8, 12, every 4 levels in 3rd edition, and these OGL style games. But what makes this fascinating is at every even level, 1, 3, 5, and a base class, you just get what's called a talent. So now what are talents? These are these little things in here. So let's see, you can see our strong hero, this dude here. But you got extreme effort. You got ignore hardness. There it is. Ignore hardness. And melee smash. So you pick one of these 3 trees. So you say probably the best one, melee smash. +1 to bonus on melee damage. So if you're hitting anything with an object, you do +1 damage. Ignore hardness ignores object hardness, making it easier to smash objects. And extreme effort lets you, when you use a strength check, you take a full round action instead of a standard action, and you receive a bonus +2, +4, +6. They're a little uninspired, I'm not gonna lie, but I think that this could have interestingly have been where you could have started to take Dungeons and Dragons. So, you take a fighter. Okay, well, what does a fighter get at, because fighters generally just get, in 3rd edition, they just got a bonus feat every other level. And you used, so you could do, okay, a fighter gets fighter talent. Well, fire talents. Well, as a fighter talent, you could get, like, weapon mastery. What does that do? +1 accuracy, +1 damage with a chosen melee weapon. Then you get, like, weapon specialization instead of it being a feat, which only fighters can take. You could big in the fighter class. You get +2 damage, +4 damage, +6 damage with your attacks. You could even do things like give them, like, a form of damage reduction or a bonus, what fighters really need, which I think is something that I would love to see from 2nd edition. But fighters just get bonuses to saving throws. Oh, what do you get? You get a bonus to your saving throw. Like in 3rd edition, it would be like Fortitude, Reflex, Will, because they didn't do the Strength, Dexterity, Constitution saving throws. You just had 3. But something like that. So you take a level 1 fighter. Okay, what do you get? Level 1, you get a fighter talent. Okay, so you pick 3, 4, 5 trees and pick these talents. You can do the same for Paladin. Well, Paladin, you get a Paladin talent. What do you want your Paladin talent to be? You want to be lay hands on, so you get lay hands on, then an improved lay hands on, then a higher improved lay hands on. Take 1 improved lay hands on and get a smite evil. Which then, like, the higher level smites could either increase how powerful they are or possibly even increase how many times per day you could use it. Like, it's like, okay, you can use it a number of times today equal to your charisma modifier, but then the second one might give you 2 additional uses, and then another one give you, 4 additional uses per day. Barbarians could do a similar thing with, like, rage powers, things like that. Like, these. So, like, when you tap in, like, okay, what do you get a barbarian? You could get rage, or you could tap into a barbarian and get damage reduction. Because something barbarians get in 3rd edition is damage reduction. Or a monk, you get a speed boost. You take speed boost out of the barbarian. If you want the speed boost from barbarian, you take 1 or 2 level dips into monk. I don't know about bringing back bonus feats, because I think that feats were kind of good, but I also think the huge problem with the OGL was the way feats. I think that feats would almost be the second big thing you think of when you think the OGL, because every book you bought just vomited 70 feats into your lap. The only thing that was really worse and more like crushing from the 3rd edition were prestige classes, which every book released a dozen prestige classes, and half of them were dumb shit like eunuch, guards. Like, oh, every prestige classes were originally meant to be this idea that you were a specialist. Like, for example, in this game, there are prestige classes. Like, okay, dedicated hero can become a. Okay, smart hero could become a field scientist. There's your field scientist. There she is with her little old sci-fi, like, Star Trek tricorder thing and her, librarian ponytail. And she just specializes in, intelligence-based things like skill breakthroughs and scientific breakthroughs, or you could choose to be a techie. And there's our techie who looks like he is suffering from a bad case of some kind of rash on his face. And he's got his little thing there. You can see down there, he's got little drones and robots. And that's what the techie does, is he specializes in, like, building robots and stuff. So if you're a smart hero, instead of just a generic, like, +2 to a given skill, +1 to all knowledge skills, or whatever smart heroes get as they level up, you now specialize specifically in the creation of robots or doing scientific breakthroughs. Yeah, here. Learning new skills, learning tricks, things like that. Oh wow, the smart hero only gets 2. That's kind of disappointing. But anyway, so they're meant to be, prestige classes are meant to be, like, highly specialized So, like, for example, in third edition, I know I'm talking a lot about third edition, but there's something to be understood about Dungeons and Dragons third edition to understand these other OGL games. You have a wizard. What does the wizard do? He casts magic. But he could go into Lore Master, where he still casts magic, but he specializes in like knowledge and divination. And these games would just vomit out stuff like, oh, well, what's this class? Well, this class is a eunuch guard, because that's one of the ones in the Book of Erotic Fantasy, is a eunuch that guards a harem. And it's like, oh yeah, king gets like 7 of these dudes. And I'm like, these are supposed to be like highly specialized people. Like, wouldn't a harem guard just be some dude with a sword who got his balls cut off? Like, that would just be what the harem eunuch guard would be. But no, instead it's a prestige class because that's just what third edition did. Um, but I think like with this, maybe not smart, strong, fast, tough, but maybe like fighter, mystic fighter, priest, which you could roll druid and cleric into, rogue, which you could do like thief stuff or bardic stuff, magic user, which you could do some various spellcaster, sorcerer, wizard, warlock kind of stuff, and just let players pick from that. You have to play around with how magic would work, because I wonder if learning spells would just have to be a talent. I mean, spells casting needs nerfed anyway in Dungeons and Dragons, but it'd be interesting to play with that idea. And by all means, if you have any ideas on how you could play with that in the comments section. But yeah, these classes, they had these talent trees, and Know Your Role had a similar thing. Their talent trees were insane and awful. Like this one, the talent trees are very, very generic. In the fast hero, they get like a defense one, which just kind of get. Well, they only have 2 trees too, but one of 2. Like the defense talent tree, they get evasion and they get uncanny dodge, which are rogue abilities that kind of give you defensive stuff, or they can just increase their base running speed. Like I said, really uninspired. So D20 Modern isn't a good game. I wouldn't recommend it. But I would recommend to game designers looking at it, because I think there are really good ideas in here, specifically with the way they build the classes and how the talent trees work. And I think that if you messed with it, that absolutely could be something that later editions of Dungeons and Dragons could mess with. And we're being completely honest, one of the weirdest things in Dungeons and Dragons, or in D20 Modern, is their gun list. That huge block, those are all guns. Those are the guns you can use. And it's like, okay, so what gun am I going to use? Well, some guns do 2d4 damage. Some do 2d6 damage. Oh, this Desert Eagle does 2d8 damage. I wonder which gun I'm going to use in a fight. Then they have different magazines. Like, for example, the Walther PPK has a 7-round box. The Colt Python has a 6-round cylinder. But, like I said, 2d8 damage. And your characters have, start with, 10, 12 hit points. 1 or 2 shots is going to be lethal. Reloading, which is a standard action in most, isn't that big of a deal. And consider how often you have to reload a crossbow in Dungeons and Dragons. Like, you can get 7 shots off before you got to reload this Wolf PPK. Where's the good weapon? The Desert Eagle has, an iron box. That is a really good weapon. But yeah, then there's long ones. You're just gonna pick the weapon that does the most damage. That's all there is to it. So yeah, 20 guns and only about 2 of them are useful. Like, there are only 2 handguns that are useful, which is the gun that does the most damage and the machine gun that has the biggest box, biggest cylinder, to load rounds into. Range isn't really that important. There are like license restrictions, like you have to have certain licenses to use them, but and wealth, yeah, I mean, I guess wealth could be kind of a thing, but it's just so weird. Like you don't need, you could have like three handguns. You could have a heavy handgun, a machine gun, and then something similar to the Derringer double shot, which you just slide into a purse. That'd be easy to conceal. Maybe three or four long arms, rifles, and shotguns. You know, they have four heavy weapons. That's probably about right. Two different machine guns, a rocket launcher and grenade launcher, and things like that. But yeah, it is interesting that these guns all do ballistic damage. They had invented a new damage type because does a bullet do bashing or piercing damage? And the answer is kind of both. And that's really one of the things I thought about the OGL is this idea of bashing, slashing, and piercing damage, which I'll get into more when I talk about melee characters, melee combat, martial combat in Dungeons and Dragons. But this idea of like the different damage types is kind of silly. I rather just call things physical damage. What are you doing? You're hitting a thing with a thing. Um, but yeah, so like the weapon list is massive. Same with the car list. There's like 30 cars in here, and none of them really matter that much. One of the other interesting things that this game does that um, D&D didn't do is you don't count money. You don't say, I have $10,000. You have a wealth score. This wealth score, various things, heavily determined by class, by feats, things like that. I think charisma might. The profession skill, I think, affects it as well, which is kind of cool. Um, I'm not sure how I'd handle it, but how it works. So let's say you have a 15 wealth. And what this means is if there's an object that's less than 15 cost, because they'll have like a cost roll, you can buy it. And there is a threshold point where like if the cost is, it might be 15, it automatically drops your wealth score. Or you can, if it costs more than your wealth score, you make a wealth check. Roll D20 plus your wealth modifier, and if you fail, you just can't afford it. And if you succeed, you can afford it, but it lowers your wealth score by 1. Instead of getting rewarded with like gold, you get rewarded like, oh, okay, everybody's wealth score goes up by 1 or by 1d4 or whatever. And that's kind of, I actually really like that idea, and I even think it would really work in Dungeons and Dragons, especially 5th editions. Like, oh, how I have 75,000 gold coins. What are you spending them on? There's nothing really to buy. But, spent 2 gold coins and buy a new silk rope, I guess. But, like, what exactly am I going to do with all this money? Nothing. There's just nothing to spend the money on. So what's even the point of tracking, hundreds of thousands of dollars in 4 different denominations when there's really nothing to spend it on? But with something like this, you just have, okay, my wealth score is 13. I can, if I need to buy something, it's like, okay, now it matters. And it also kind of gets into, because like the idea of, taxes and, rent, groceries, things like that, that's just kind of baked into your wealth score. It's like, okay, if your wealth score's 13, you're living comfortably. You live at about a 10. Probably less than middle class. You're middle class. You probably rent, but you rent a house. You have a car that more or less works. Could use a couple repairs. You just you buy food. You go eat out once a week. And that's kind of the lifestyle you live on that wealth. And you don't have to worry about how much you're spending per week, per night, per month in an inn. Because what you're spending is just baked into your wealth score. Your wealth score also kind of dictates your life status. Obviously, you could say, I'm going to live an exorbitant life status. I'm going to live like a football player, even though I don't make their money. And you could put that in your DM. The DM would start tacking your points down, putting you in debt, things like that. But it works a lot more like a skill than it does just looking at your character sheet and seeing an accumulating amount of coins that you're either not going to spend it on, or some of these older games, some of these OSR games that are like, oh, every time you enter and leave a town, you got to pay 20 gold coins in order to, pay the fees for exiting a town, which is just a heavy-handed way of trying to manage finances. Like, oh, characters get too rich, so better start okay. Yeah, but you feel ripped off, and taxes are ripped. You feel ripped off, and you pay taxes. Period. But you know what I mean, right? When the DM just suddenly decides to charge you guys 10% taxes, then you're like, oh, you're just taking my money from me. So the wealth as a stat or a skill is a lot smoother way of handling something like that. But yeah, I don't know, because I wonder how, and then there's equipment, the amazing combat modifiers in D&D, which, man, I just get rid of all this crap. Like, just hand wave it. Are you ducking behind cover? Okay, your opponent just gets a -2 to their attack, where you +2 AC, +2 defense. Oh, see knockout blow. That reminds me. So how this game works, so if you punch somebody, you don't do damage. You check against their constitution, and if your attack, I think it's modifier, so you do like 1d3 damage, +1 damage. It's like 1d3 plus something like that, but you check against one of their stats. And if you do enough damage to overcome, it might actually just straight be their constitution score. But if your attack, 1d3, 1d4, whatever, plus your score deals over their constitution score, you knock them out. Because the idea is, pop, you knock them out. And it's a terrible mechanic that I'm glad I haven't really seen anywhere else. Because the argument that the guy makes in here is that, generally speaking, if two people get into a fist fight, they'll just bash each other until somebody gets frustrated and picks up a weapon. And that is true. Like, most fist fights escalate to lethal violence. One, from a mechanical standpoint, it makes fighting so awkward. It means that there just isn't any reason to throw a punch. But what if you are trying to knock somebody out? What if you are just in a fist fight? You basically have to escalate to lethal force, and that's also not very cinematic. And also, like, the idea of two guys, kind of bapping each other until, one of them. But the thing is, even if it's not going to knock you out, and even if fights do eventually escalate, if you get punched in the nose, that's still damage you're taking. That is still pain being inflicted. That's still damage being inflicted. That is still focus and combat ability being lost because a dude is punching you. So I don't know, like, there's like a martial art feat that makes you do lethal damage. There's a sucker punch ability that increases the damage up to like a D8, so you actually have a pretty decent chance of, knocking the average person out. But yeah, the knockout rules, the unarmed combat rules are just really, really silly. But yeah, like I said, I would just really be interested. I might even try kind of playing around with this idea of, when you pick a class, you level up in a class, instead of just getting at level 1, you get, I'm now 5th level fighter. I just get an extra attack. Instead, you could like pull from the extra attack tree. And you can make prerequisites. You have to be at least level 5, or at least a level 5 fighter to get this extra attack feat. Or, you have to have like the first level of weapon focus and weapon specialization trees to get into this tree. Because prerequisites are just a thing that have been in 3rd edition forever. Just to get something, you might have a prerequisite. And 5th edition has a few feats that require that, but for the most part, it's nowhere near as prominent. Like, to get dodge in Dungeons & Dragons 3rd edition, you have to have at least a 13 dexterity. But it's so fascinating, and I've seen a couple games use this kind of talent fee. Most notably, Know Your Role, which is an unbalanced, horrible, unplayable mess. I can almost do a second review of Know Your Role. I have so much to say about it, but um, but I think that had this game taken off and more games, because for the most part, a lot of the OGL games just kind of adapt third edition's stuff, and a lot of it was just because they wanted to straight be compatible with Dungeons and Dragons third edition. You know, a game like the Swashbuckling Adventures is what it's called. The classes they introduced, they wanted you to be able to play in your D&D campaign. The prestige classes, they wanted you to be able to play. The items, they wanted you to just be able to slot into your Dungeons and Dragons third edition campaign. Same with Oriental Adventures and Rokugan. You know, they wanted you to just be able to put the samurai, the ninja, the inkyo into the slot them straight into the game instead of just like kind of having its own sphere that it plays in, like D20 Modern. Hypothetically, you could play a D20 Modern character in Dungeons and Dragons 3rd Edition. It would be awkward, I think, but it's more or less compatible. You could do it. But the talent tree, which honestly is a big thing I really want to talk about, talking about D20 Modern, the talent tree, is something I think that maybe 6th edition might look into when they finally release it. I know 5.5, which is 5.5. Actually, that reminds me for a future episode, I want to talk about Rangers in Dungeons and Dragons. Because, oh my goodness, 5.5 in the Rangers. Their capstone is +2 damage. That's a sabotage, right, guys? Like, that's literally them trying to sabotage Ranger players. Anyway, I digress. But, you know, like, oh, well, I pick Ranger, so I can choose either favorite class, or I could choose maybe one of the combat feats, dual wielding or archery. And then, you know, you could dip, but you could also give the Ranger enough abilities that they could, players could play. But the idea here would be, you know, you would take a handful of levels in Class A, a handful in Class B, a handful in Class C, a handful in Class D, and kind of build this character that's kind of your own thing. Because, let's be honest, in 3rd edition, and even especially 5th edition, if you pick a class, you're pretty much locked into that class. Like, if you pick a Warlock in Dungeons and Dragons, there might be some variance in spell selection, but you're more or less playing the same Warlock that you're playing. I know they're the archetypes. The archetypes are what? 15, 20% of your class? Most classes get 3 or 4 archetypes. But, I mean, you're still looking at 80 to 85% of your class being the same no matter what archetype you pick. A paladin's pretty much a paladin. A fighter's pretty much a fighter. And so there isn't a lot of diversity for you to create a character that is mechanically yours. And just, part of the game. It's a game first. The game is all game first. I'd argue simulationist second. It's definitely trying to be simulationist, especially with things like movement rules, the vehicle combat rules, damage rules, the idea of the fist fighting. Because, like you said, if 2 untrained people get into a fist fight, it usually either gets broken up or it escalates to something else. Someone picking up a weapon to use an improvised weapon, or pulling a knife, pulling a gun. So it's trying to simulate that a lot. Narrativist, I mean, it's got some narrativist elements, but certainly it's not trying to facilitate narrativism in the same way certain games like Danger Patrol or PBTA are. Developing a narrative is less important to this game than the mechanics and the simulation elements. So the game is simulationist narrativist. But the game is absolutely a game, and you are supposed to, more than anything, interact with the game's mechanics, as Dungeons and Dragons have been forever gamists at its core. So, like, not letting me kind of develop my character in a way that I can kind of develop it, because Dungeons and Dragons, I said 5th edition, you look at anybody's guides and they'll tell you, oh, you got to take a 2 level dips in Warlock to get this ability so that you can map. You're basically just doing what this game wants you to do, which is dip into a level, take a cool ability you like, move on to the next cool ability you want. So what you have is a collection of really cool abilities. Now, the biggest problem with D20 Modern was because it was the first game to kind of do it, and I mean, not the first game to kind of do that, but you know what I mean. Like, when it comes to OGL, it really innovated with the way that worked. And so it's unbalanced and it's very, very awkward. But I think with some intelligent work and maybe some more play testing, some more evolution, we could have this talent system be something that's really good and could help take these D&D style games, Pathfinder even, to a new level where people can kind of make the class they want to play. And you could even restrict things, like if you take this necrotic ability, you can't take this necrotic ability and this divine ability at the same time. If you really wanted to, if you were really worried about the way they interact with each other, you could restrict it. Certainly, I know that it's a bad mouthfeel to give players those kind of restrictions, but sometimes you just kind of have to make the game fair. And I mean, obviously, because Dungeons and Dragons is what it is, everyone's already figured out the most optimal builds for characters, and you would get that very quickly in a game like this. People would very quickly tell you, oh, you want to make a melee fighter? Okay, you take 3 levels in fighter, take these 3 talents, take 2 levels in tough hero, take this talent, make sure you get this bonus feat from them because that's what you get. Then you go into this prestige class, take 4 levels of this prestige class to get to this ability. Now take a level in 2 levels in smart hero because smart heroes have an ability that allow them to give their intelligence bonus to their things like that, to their defense. So people will figure out how to optimize it, but I think it also would allow players to kind of, it would help facilitate narrativism, kind of give them the ability to kind of like almost build their own class. I don't know if you'd want to let players just dump a pit and tell them to pick, because I do think things like attack bonuses, attack proficiencies, and hit points and spells per day are things that might need to be reined in a little bit. But maybe you could just be everybody gets a D8 hit points every level. You could take this ability that gives you a D10 at this level instead of a D8, D12 at this level, whatever. And just extra hit points if that's what you want to do. Everybody has a proficiency bonus, and when you pick your character, you get let's say 5 weapon proficiencies. Just pick 5 weapon proficiencies, the weapons you're proficient with at the start of character creation. Maybe something of that nature. And so, like, I don't know if you guys have any ideas, or if you want to kind of think and spitball ideas, by all means comment. Our channel is kind of a small channel. We are trying to grow it. So if you watch this video, I don't like to do this kind of like generic YouTube. Oh, but like obviously, like, comment, subscribe if you really want. Subscription count doesn't mean anything anyway if you're not watching the videos. Watch the video, comment. By all means, leave comments, because me and Josh do read the comments. We do try to keep up the comments, and we do kind of enjoy discussions on this stuff. And I would certainly enjoy seeing what you guys think of these ideas I've thrown around. And more than anything, if you see something you like and you know somebody who would kind of like our kind of content, by all means, share it with them. Just help get the word out little by little. But yeah, that's it. So, yeah, by all means, let me know what you think of the idea of replacing just a level tier. At level A, level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you get A, B, C, D, versus at level 1 and 3, you can choose A, B, C, or D. Level 1, you choose A, B, C, or D. At level 2, you choose A, B, C, or D. Something like that. If you think that would help improve D&D, or do you think it would make it more off-putting to new players? But I would enjoy seeing what you guys think, and I will see you guys next time. So, goodbye.